And my brother and I both went to college with the expectations of leaving the farm behind. I mean, we had seen how tough farm economy and farm life could be. Our dad and grandpa had ups and downs with it, just like every farmer in the nation. And they managed to make a good living and send us to college and do all those things. And but farming's always uncertain economically. So anyway, we went off to school, and I got a degree in botany, and Seth got a degree in business, and then I went on to graduate school and got a degree in entomology. So I was pursuing a career in science, and me and my brother talked every day, after we parted ways in college, and we just finally decided we couldn't stay away from here. So during that time, a lot of farmers around here were, either retiring or just having to give up, because it was a bad time to be getting into agriculture. That was right before the boom of big prices, and things were tough. My brother and I went from just a few hundred acres, and then our dad's base farm was about 3,200. We added, over about a 3-year period, we bulked the combination of the two up to about 10,000 acres. We were going backwards. We thought with the added acreage, added volume, we were gonna, with a margin that was thin, the plan was to add volume. That wasn't working for us. Pigweed had recently become resistant to Roundup, and it was already resistant to ALS herbicides, and so pigweed started becoming a serious problem for us. We had over $100 an acre in just pigweed control. Between hand hoeing and herbicide, we were at like $140 an acre. I started looking for a different way to control weeds, something cultural that maybe we hadn't thought of. I knew organic growers couldn't use herbicides, so I started looking on YouTube. Finally ran up on a guy that was growing pumpkins in Pennsylvania. He was organic and he was no-till, and I hadn't ever seen that before in my short couple months of searching. And he was rolling down this big old grass. It was, almost over the hood of his tractor. He was just rolling it flat and then planting pumpkin transplants into it. And I don't know if they have pigweed in Pennsylvania or whatever, but I know they've got problem weeds in Pennsylvania, but this guy didn't have any. He just had this big mat of green that he was rolling down and mechanically killing. And then when that stuff died and turned brown, those pumpkin transplants were the only thing left in that field, and they were beautiful all the way through the end, clean. And I just thought, man, this he's got the answer. We scraped up all the money we could that fall, which wasn't much because we'd already spent it all on herbicide, but we were able to plant 300 acres of cereal rye that fall. And then we planted our first cash crop into a cereal rye cover crop in the spring of 2010. We saw a significant reduction in the amount of herbicide we needed in those fields, that 300 acres versus the rest of the farm. After about 3 years, we were covering almost the entire farm with cover crop. And we started planting into it bigger and letting it get bigger, and the bigger it got, the more benefits we saw. Less weeds, less irrigation, things we'd never thought about. We noticed on the fields that had big green cover crop, we'd get a big spring rain, there wouldn't be any water running out the bottom of them, and the fields that we still had tilled would have just dirty, muddy water running out the bottom. All those things that we weren't expecting or anticipating, we started noticing, and we started noticing it in our bottom line. We weren't having to irrigate as much, we were capturing more rainfall, and the weed control, just the budget for that went way down. And now we're 11, 12 years in, I guess 11 years in, we've started reducing fertility inputs. We've incorporated animals on the farm when we can. It's just opened a lot of doors that would have remained closed to us forever, I guess, if we were still a slave to herbicides.
So I'm a first-generation farmer, and this all started by just me wanting to raise a beef and a pig for my own benefit. And so I just thought, you know, I want some quality meat, and I'm just gonna raise some because I had a little bit of land, and so I did, and it turned out great. And next thing you knew, other family members said, hey, next time you put me in on that because we want in on this. And so family members and friends, and long story short, within a year or two, you know, we had 4, 5, 6, 8 beef I was raising for everybody that was in, you know, my circle of influence. And so since I've always been an entrepreneur and I've always been a business person, I thought, man, I can raise 15 or 20 just as easy as I can raise 6 or 8 or 10. And so the business kind of took off as a hobby. It started out as something personal, but turned into a hobby. But then it really took a big turn for us, and it really changed for us when my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so we spent a good year and a half going through surgeries and chemos and radiations and all of this stuff. And finally, of course, we got the all clear. We were in remission and we were happy. But a few months later, it had all come back. And so that course of 18 months, anybody that's been through that knows how hard that is. And it was very hard on a family. And so when it came back, my wife and I both decided, you know, we can't go through that again. It almost killed us. It was rough. So we began looking at alternative ways. So there is some management practices that we implement to try to produce a high quality beef while at the same time regenerate our soils and be good stewards of this creation. So you can see the animals behind me. Behind me here you can see some high tensile electric wire fence. Forage has a growth curve, and so once it reaches seed head, it pretty much says its life is over. And once it's beginning to start to grow, it takes a while for it to hit, but when it gets into that middle stage, that's its rapid growth moment. And so we use herbivores to manage our forage, and we're using some things of electric wire to give them the proper paddock size that they can get the best out of the forage. They can keep the forage in its rapid growth mode. The real term for what we do, since we're a livestock beef operation, is this is more termed pasture cropping. So this is where we're putting in some type of annuals. We're trying to build diversity. We're doing it for several reasons, but these pasture crops, these cover crops, are for one to help our animal performance. We want to feed animals well. We want to finish beef that will marble and fatten, but the lifeblood of our whole operation is the soil. So we're putting these crops in the ground so that this particular one is winter, fall, spring crops, so we keep a living root in the ground 12 months out of the year. So as these cover crops come up, they're of course collecting solar energy, they're photosynthesizing, they're capturing things out of the atmosphere, and the way that this works is they are pumping all of that life into the soil. We're realizing now that our organic matter is increasing, our topsoil, we're rebuilding that. It's no longer clay. We're getting minerals and vitamins back in the ground. We're seeing it in our animal performance. We're seeing it in our collection of water. We're not having erosion. We're solving many problems by this one particular task of planting a annual crop into our perennial pasture. People definitely want high quality meat, and we want to, you know, do it in a sustainable, regenerative way, and we want to push this. But of course, if the product itself is not any good, people are not going to promote it and they're not going to support it. So we use Angus. We use a very specific line of Angus. We use smaller Angus so that we don't have to have supplemental feed. We don't have to keep them fed up. We might call it low input, that we can put on forages and they can fully sustain, reach their physiological size. They can put intermuscular fat into the marbling of the meat and do it all on forage. So of course our business model is to produce proteins that people can purchase that is not only regenerative to the creation, but also very beneficial and nutritious to them. So we raise beef, we raise pork. We have chosen specific genetic lines that can do that on the forages that we produce. So here we come 10 years later after all these events, and so we have not looked back. We've totally dived into a holistic life, and my wife is still cancer-free to this day. We want things to be natural. We want it to be the way that God has intended it, and that's the model that we've chose. And so what we've seen over the course of 10 years of doing it is that model definitely works. So we continue to educate ourselves, we continue to implement new things, but we use nature as our model. We're passionate about that, and we believe that when you become passionate about it and you start implementing in your life, you're going to see the benefits of it as well.
I'm Keith Scoggins with the Natural Resource Conservation Service here in Arkansas. I am the state cropland agronomist, and I'm here today. We've got this demonstration set up, and what we're going to be looking at is infiltration and runoff over 5 different land uses. We've got a cover crop field that's no-till cover crop, a stale seed bed, our conventional tillage, a pasture, and then a woodland tray as well. And we can't demonstrate that nice spring rain that we get where you get to lay on the couch and take a nap. But this is going to be that summertime rain that's so important to irrigation that we get where it may rain a half to an inch in just a few minutes. Well, that's what we're going to demonstrate here. As you can see, we got about an inch of rain in just that few minutes. Just like I talked about that summer storm, an inch rain could be the difference in having to irrigate 3 times or 4 times, or if we happen to catch a couple of those, could be even 5 times. Let's eliminate some irrigations and save on our groundwater. But another thing I want to call your attention to is not only the runoff. As you can see, we've got runoff, we've got erosion from the stale seed bed. If you notice, it started at almost 1/4 of an inch of rain. We started to get runoff. It took the conventional till soils a little bit longer, but once it finally sealed over, we got to see runoff. That inch rain, you can see the majority of it ran off. What I want you to notice on the pasture, even though it's pasture and it's got a ground cover over it, and this is rotationally grazed pasture, but as you can see, it was overgrazed. It's grazed too short, and there's no biomass there left to hold those raindrops, and we still got some runoff, even over our rotationally grazed pasture. Our woodland tract, what do we see? What do we notice? We got a little runoff, very little runoff. Our cover crop field, we got a little bit of runoff, but very little runoff. So out of these 5 fields, which ones are going to need to be irrigated again first? Every farm of any size that you see in Arkansas has their own excavator. That's because we're getting significant amounts of erosion, and we're having to clean out our ditches almost annually in some cases. Where are our nutrients going that we're applying? Our precious fertilizer that we spend hard-earned money for. Where is that fertilizer? Where are those plant nutrients going? Well, they're going to the ditch. But here on our cover crop field, what we did notice is that rain that we caught it all. Our soil stayed in place. We're decreasing pumping costs. We're decreasing fertility costs. We're not having to reapply nutrients year after year after year. We're not having to update infrastructure. We're not having to clean out ditches. We're not having to replace pipes that's broken or maybe that's washed out because of excessive runoff. So the thing I want you to look at now is the important part. How much of that 1 inch rain that we got did we actually get to keep? And that's what's really going to catch your attention. On our conventionally tilled soils here in the middle, you notice we got some infiltration from an inch rain. But how much did we actually get to keep? Let me just get it out here where you can see it a little easier. Runoff compared to infiltration. Runoff compared to infiltration. The first thing that comes to my mind is our long-term, I say long-term, 5-year plus no-till cover crop field infiltrated more of that water than what the woods even did. But our pasture, when we look at it, it ran off. Even though it's been rotationally grazed, even though it's been properly managed, we had runoff, more runoff than infiltration. Our conventionally tilled soil, we didn't get to keep hardly any of that rain. Our stale seed bed, you know, we worked it up last fall and quote unquote no-tilled it in the spring. We didn't get to keep much of that 1-inch rainfall. Another important thing, and I spoke about it earlier, is when we look at this, not only did we lose the rain, we lost our precious topsoil. And topsoil is not something that we can replace. Our stale seed bed started running off at a 1/4 inch of rainfall. We started to get runoff. Again, our topsoil and our nutrients have went on down the road, down the ditch to our neighbor, or on down to the river, or possibly even the ocean eventually. I left the rain gauge in so we'd be able to tell the difference between the conventional tillage and the stale seed bed. This is an important thing. We've seen infiltration, right? We've seen some water that went into the soil profile in both these soils. We didn't get a lot of infiltration, but we did get some. So where did that infiltration go? What does this soil look like? Did it go where we needed it? I don't think that it did. What about our stale seed bed? We got some infiltration on the stale seed bed. Did it go where it needed it? No, we had some little pockets, maybe around the edges or something, that broke through. But this soil, as you can see, is still just as dry as it was when we put it in there a while ago. My closing point with this is going to be, no matter which of these that you're at, no matter if you're a conventional tillage right now, or you're a stale seed bed farmer, or a cover crop farmer, which one of these do you feel like is the best for your long-term profitability? Not sustainability. Sustain means to stay at your current rate. We don't want to be sustainable, we want to be successful. Let's do more than we're doing now.
This is kind of what we want to look like come planting time. This is wheat, but we use oats, and, primarily oats and cereal rye. When we first started, you know, we were full tillage and everything was worked up all the time, and you go out and dig in the dirt, and if it was wet, it'd just be platy and it'd fall apart in sheets. And there wouldn't be any earthworms or anything in it, and there'd be nothing on the top of it. You know, we tried to keep it sterile. I mean, that's still a pretty common practice around right now, but since then we've tried to keep something living all the time, you know, all year long. We want to go from one living cover crop right into a living crop, and then as soon as that crop starts to taper off and we harvest, we want to plant something living again. We do that for a number of reasons. We started off with doing it for weed control, for pig weeds. And then we noticed how much less we were watering, and because our infiltration rates were going up and our soil structure was getting better. And then we started noticing life in the soil, you know, stuff we could see with our eyes, like, you know, earthworms are a big deal. I'd never seen earthworms before in our tilled ground. You just couldn't find them. You'd have to go to a fence row or something to find earthworms. But now there's stuff we see all the time that you won't see in a tilled field. Like, for example, where we're standing, there's a whole bunch of different fungi that are living here. White cap mushrooms and just, you know, all different kinds alive down in here. And that'll never have a chance to take hold in a tilled field because you're just constantly disrupting the ecosystem. And then the other thing that we've noticed as far as life in the soil is like earthworms and things. We dig up soil and it's full of roots. And like there's an earthworm in that right there. But just the amount of roots and it's how crumbly it is. You know, this field here is not as good as some of the other ones, but it's still getting better all the time. And these roots are just pumping carbon in this soil constantly. So those are just some things that we've seen that happen, you know, over a few years. And the longer we go, the better it gets. Earthworms are capable of cycling. So what they do is they eat all this residue and they move this soil through their digestive tract. And when they do that, you know, the residue in the soil, what comes out their back end is bioavailable nutrients. I mean, they're mineralizing and making available tons and tons of nutrients every year. And there's actually some statistics that I've referenced in some of my presentations about how many tons of N, P, and K and micronutrients that 1 million earthworms per acre can cycle in a year. And it's enough to make a crop on. I mean, so, you know, adding synthetic fertilizer is not, if you've got enough of these guys, you don't need any fertilizer really, but definitely not as much. You know, soil is an ecosystem. I mean, it lives and breathes just like we do. The problem is, through all mankind's knowledge, we've turned it into a chemistry set. And that chemistry costs a lot of money, you know, so we're trying to find ways to not buy so much of that. And that's what we're realizing, and it's because we're fostering this life, and it's working.
Maybe we haven't totally convinced you that you're going to convert your whole farm to no-till and cover crop. And I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to at least look at it. If you're embarrassed, take a field on the back side of the farm that nobody can see from the highway and plant it in a cover crop, but only plant half of it. You plant half the field and take care of it the way you normally would. Keep up with your inputs, hours on the tractor, the man sitting in the seat. Do the other half, no-till with cover crops. And do the same thing. Keep up with your man hours, keep up with your irrigations, and you'll see side by side, hey, the first year, your yields may go down. They could. It's a very good possibility. We're not saying you can increase yields, but what you will do is you'll decrease inputs. And the goal, my goal, is for our farmers in Arkansas to be more profitable. It's all about staying in business for the next generation. And it's easy to think right now that, hey, soybeans are $14 and corn's almost $6, wheat's $7, best price we've had in years. I don't need to do all of this. You're right, you don't need to do it this year, but you need to be prepared for could happen next year. And that's what we're here for, is to prepare you for the bad times so that you succeed in the bad times and not only in the good times.